When 1 year ago, at the ministerial meeting in Paris, together with the Vice Rector Scagliarini, we suddenly decided to plan that academic consultation. Actually, I had no idea that we had been planning such an impressive event. And it is even more impressive seeing from the stage, considering that the room is still full and we are in the afternoon of the day. So thank you for staying with us and to keep participating. Thank you so much. Well spent money, we'll say. And now, related to session 1, academic and related civic values in changing society, I will ask to Helmi Andersson to take the floor and to give us the report of the discussion, please.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And Bologna, the city is beautiful, and the discussions today have been most interesting. So I had the wonderful opportunity to summarize the discussion from session number 1. So we had a really interesting and rich discussion on the topic, which was academic and civic values in changing societies. The questions we tried to answer were the following. How can universities be safe havens for open debate in times of high political tension? How can we safeguard academic freedom and independent research? How can we build strong communities that together spread the message of education as a public good? How can we support and promote these values through the Bologna process? As our keynotes and roundtable speakers, we had Livio Mattei, the Provost of Central European University, Janica Spanagal, researcher at the Global Public Policy Institute, Paola Maria Marasarella, rector at University of Pisa, Daniel Kontowski, researcher at University of Winchester, Rob Copeland, chair of ETUECE, Standing Committee for Higher Education and Research, and Shubha Jan, head of Education Department at the Bologna UG and the Council of Europe. So yes. Academic freedom and institutional autonomy are the key values of European higher education area, and the Bologna Declaration explicitly refers to the Magna Carta. One of the criteria for accession to the European higher education area is respect for academic freedom and institutional autonomy, and therefore it is also one of the elements on which compliance with European higher education area values and policies should be judged. However, rather unanimously, our speakers agreed that academic freedom has not received the attention it deserves in the Bologna process. Although the institutional autonomy has improved in many cases, it's also important to distinguish between institutional autonomy and academic freedom. They often complement each other, but as Janica Spanagal and Livio Mattei pointed out in their speeches, they are not equal. Mattei even pointed out that autonomy has improved while freedom has not. And I believe everyone in the session agreed that academic freedom is a fundamental value of the European higher education area now and in the future, and that it should be addressed in the next communiqué. So in the discussion today, we were presented with many different threats that are posed to academic freedom. These threats consist of political threats and threats related to commodification and funding of higher education and research. They can be crude and obvious, but also subtle and unnoticeable. We have seen these threats on different levels realized in European countries, for example, more crudely in Hungary, but also more subtle infringements in, for example, Britain, as Livio Mattei pointed out, with letters being sent to staff from members of parliament questioning the educational material. As it was pointed out by the crowd, we've also seen free speech and academic interaction with society being limited through hate speech. While one of the most important tasks of academia is to interact with society, efforts to silence academics through harassment on social media are becoming increasingly common. How can we fight that and support academics to participate in societal discourse? One way of doing this is to provide incentives for participating in public discourse and having strong academic communities that can support each other. Rob Copeland also brought up the importance of steady employment and good working conditions, which is an important factor in salvaging academic freedom and academics from self-censorship. If you need to worry that your employment is challenged because of what you're saying, we have a problem. We're also seeing increased marketization and commercialization of higher education, which harms institutional autonomy and academic freedom. Examples of these are policies such as the increased use of performance-based funding, the reliance on fixed-term contracts for academic staff, and the shift towards corporate forms of institutional governance that limits the freedom to research and the right to teach without any interference. As a student, I'm glad that several speakers talked about students as part of the academic community rather than customers. Perceiving higher education as a commodity instead of a public good is manifested through tuition fees, through which students are seen as customers rather than part of the community. I agree with Shubajan. It's more than a semantic difference. As a member, rather than a customer, you have something at stake and fight to change it for the better. Students, as members of the academic community, are fundamental for the future of Bologna. Linking education to the needs of the labor market is also on the rise. However, if graduate outcomes and labor market outcomes are emphasized in excess, it leads to performance management and, in some higher education systems, increased performance-based funding. This can create biases to certain types of subject areas. Whilst it's important that public authorities can ensure there is an adequate amount of educated people where it is needed in society, and that the labor market has a supply of qualified workforce in order to keep our societies functional, the higher education institution's mission is greater than that. Academia has a responsibility to ensure that knowledge in certain fields is not lost, but fostered, even if the labor market or public considers that specific area futile for the moment. Daniel Kontowski talked about this by discussing the role of liberal arts education in the European higher education area. As he pointed out, too tight frameworks letting the labor market define which fields are important can harm academic freedom and lead to the decrease in some programs and study fields. As we discussed today, the role of higher education in society is to foster and preserve knowledge and culture, and in that way benefit society as a whole. In order to do so, the whole academic community should take part in decisions that affect that community. It's crucial that both staff and students are actively defining where the university should go next. Which are the important questions that need to be answered? An increase in student participation in the governance and administration of the university was proposed by Paolo Manzarella, and could result in more strong academic communities that actively promote academic freedom and preserve the institutional autonomy. Now, I will hopefully be able to present some solutions and next steps for the future of the Bologna process. The work has already started through the expert group formed within Bologna, but to address this problem with infringement of academic freedom, but there is still work to be done. So the solutions to the political threats are not that easy to address. As Shurbajan pointed out, the most important parts of the Bologna process are the ministerial meetings, and there is a risk that they do have a reluctance to pinpoint their colleagues from other countries failing to meet criteria. Now, as I stated earlier, it was agreed that the next communiqué should address academic freedom. However, it's important to find the right wording and the exact criteria for what academic freedom means in order to have actual progress on this matter. This is something Livio Matti also brought up in his keynote speech, that we until now have lacked a common wording and definition for academic freedom in the Bologna process. An interesting thing that Paolo Manzarella pointed out was that one way of safeguarding academic freedom from the political threats imposed by governments is by further developing and maintaining cooperation of universities in Europe through more joint programs and research involving universities all over Europe. This should include not only research, but also teaching and education. One thing the speakers all agreed on is that in order to promote academic freedom across Europe through the Bologna process, we need to create a common set of values and tools to measure it, so that we can know that progress is being made. Academic freedom is a composite of many different things, and in order to measure it, it's almost easier to measure the lack of it. As we've discussed earlier, academic freedom can be infringed not only through attacks on academic staff, but it can also consist of marketization, for example. In order to measure it, we need to have some kind of tool, and the research conducted at the Global Public Policy Institute by Jenica Spanagle and her colleagues is aimed to give us this. They are creating ways to measure academic freedom globally, and the preliminary results will be reported before the next ministerial meeting and will hopefully be very helpful in defining the future of the Bologna process. Moreover, as many of our speakers pointed out, the success of the European higher education area after 2020 requires a greater focus on core public investment in higher education. Higher education is a public responsibility, and it should also be seen in the funding of the higher education institutions. It's also important to reassure that staff and students have access to publications and data to make sure academic freedom can truly be realized. So, to conclude and sum up the discussion from this morning, what we would like to see happening in the European higher education area beyond 2020 are the following things. As Livia-Matti suggested, the following ministerial meeting in Rome should address the issue of academic freedom. As Shurbajan pointed out, it's important to find the correct wordings for this in order to keep countries that have now infringed upon academic freedom within the process. Broken dialogue is better than none at all. And in order to do so, we need to create a common definition on academic freedom and find ways to improve and protect it. Hopefully, the research of Spanagle with her colleagues will help us with this task. As Copeland and Manzarello pointed out, strong communities are important for institutional autonomy and assuring academic freedom. We need to see students as members of the community, not as customers. And as Kontowski pointed out, we also need to have space in the Bologna process for countries, institutions, and programs to experiment and find the best ways of doing research and education. If there is no room to experiment, academic freedom is infringed. And also, we need an increase in core public funding so that higher education institutions can focus on teaching and researching instead of chasing money. Hopefully, you've gotten a picture of what was discussed in our session. Thank you.
Now I will ask to Borna Nemet. Is it you? Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Borna Nemet will talk with us about the student-centered learning discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, good afternoon to all the participants and the speakers of the Bologna Process 20th Anniversary. I would really like to thank you for a very productive and the energetic discussions today. I will present you the key conclusions of the Student-Centered Learning Roundtable. There were 4 key panelists of the roundtable: Terry Maguire, the Director of the National Forum of the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning; Gohar Hovhannisyan, the European Students' Union Executive Committee member and the newly elected Vice President of the ESU; Caroline MacDonald, the researcher at the Institute of Technology in Karlov; and Catherine Isaacs, the BFG Vice Chair. The facilitator was Egirdas Sarkanas, a colleague of mine from ESU. Student-centered learning nowadays is a prominent concept within the European higher education area, where students learn best when they are engaged, supported, challenged, and encouraged by individuals around them. Terry Maguire presented the collaborative work of the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education in Ireland and the Union of Students of Ireland. Working in close partnership with those who learn, teach and shape policy and practice in Irish higher education, the National Forum puts teaching and learning at the center of the sectoral enhancement and innovation. Students are clear about the need for learning opportunities to be relevant to the real world and to move beyond the traditional classroom to maximize their learning. If learning in higher education is to be impactful, such learning must stretch beyond existing knowledge and skills and enable students to learn both about themselves and others and about the nature of learning. A student-centered approach negotiated in partnership provides a solid platform for enhancement of student-centered learning. Only by working all together we can produce and implement student-centered learning at the national level. In order for it to be successful, it is crucial to stop looking at the students as a second-level academic citizens. To work on a positive development of student-centered learning, it is important to support both the students and those who teach. Engagement will not simply happen by itself. We have to build that partnership, which is, of course, not easy. Enhancement requires patience and partnership in order to be productive at the end. Care, time, and help is what students value the most and see as the key in the facilitation of student-centered learning. Active partnership and engagement with students are the key element for enabling students to influence teaching and learning policy and practice at the national level. Furthermore, Gohar Hovhannisyan points out that student-centered learning is a key priority in the advocacy work of the European Students' Union. Several surveys and projects were conducted by the European Students' Union, which surveyed students' representatives across Europe on how they perceive the level of implementation of student-centered learning. Even though student-centered learning is included in a variety of policy documents at the European level, it is often poorly understood in those policies, resulting in the lack of concrete changes in practice. Also, there is a confusion regarding a student-centered learning approach, resulting in many problems on a practical, everyday level of the university life, because different stakeholders, or even the same groups of stakeholders in different parts of institutions, can have different expectations of what a shift to student-centered learning can bring. Student involvement on the student-centered learning on the national level is lacking and at a very low rate, whereas student-centered learning still does not appear to be a part of our reality. There is a huge misconception within students, creating frustrations with stakeholders. We must be aware that not every student is ready for student-centered learning, and also that students need to have a proper preparation in order to be able to study within student-centered learning approach. According to students, the perception about implementation of student-centered learning is still not very concise. More than half of the respondents in a research from 39 EU countries confirm student-centered learning is rather formal and not implemented in the curricula, meaning the lack of interest and involvement. Learning outcomes are not clearly defined, resulting in incomprehensive learning process. Quality assurance in student-centered learning through the Bologna process shows that it is predominantly not present, which has to be changed. Caroline MacDonald presented a key recommendation to enhance the potential of student-centered learning and student partnership by appointing students to actively moderate the discussions in the digital space, thus eliminating the need for teachers to assume the leadership role for large groups. It is necessary that courses design and assessment that incorporates students and partners, and this way facilitates flexible student-centered participation and maximizes the potential of digital technologies to enhance the digital skills and connection involving the sustainable development. It is important in student-centered learning to have a partnership approach with student-teacher communication. The importance of feedback is crucial to get validation and shows weak points, but also it is time-consuming. The attention is put on what would student-centered learning look like in the future, while it has to be flexible and open to questions. Also, there is a visible impetus on student-centered learning through innovation and improved teaching quality. Staff are supported to introduce innovative teaching methods and encouraged to disseminate the shared best practice experience. Student-centered learning focuses on active participation of learners, supporting and encouraging each other towards deeper learning and meaningful discussion. And Catherine Isaacs discussed the current discourse on student-centered learning, which is rather skeptical. Student is a central factor and has to be the center of learning. Student-centered competence-based learning is a guiding principle for many who are engaged in the actual practice of learning, teaching, and assessment. Our competences are rapidly changing in the modern world, and for that reason we need new ways of forming competences to deal with these problems. Student-centered learning is the center of higher education area and should be used to produce meaningful dialogue. It appears explicitly in the more recent Bologna documents, but it was present a long time before. Its connections with the Bologna key commitments make it central to the European higher education area, although its implementation is still problematic, and it is often still perceived as wholly or in part outside of the responsibility of ministries. The necessary competences to students can only be given by lowering barriers, creating the common framework, and using the European credit transfer system, which is student-centered with the idea to allow students to be mobile and partake different learning experiences and to be facilitated by the agreed qualifications framework. So to sum up, what about the future of the student-centered learning? Should it become flexible or open to questions, or maybe brought to the global dialogue? As we work to define those goals for the next 10 years, it is important to remember the original inspiration of the Bologna process. And now I will quote Catherine Isaacs. If this is understood, as we suggest, as facilitating flexible, individual and informed choices of students of all ages and backgrounds, it can be a meaningful theme for ongoing discussion with other higher education areas, because it is in our hands and it is our primary mission within the next decade to detect and successfully overcome all misconceptions that we're facing at the moment. Thank you.
And now, Peggy Pavletic, thank you, will report on the session regarding providing leadership for sustainable development, the role of higher education. Peggy, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear organizers, speakers, and participants, I would like to thank you all for a productive and active morning, full of fruitful discussions and suggestions. It has been my deepest honor to be here in the past few days and to visit this historical and academic city of Bologna. My name is Peggy, and I am a student from the board of the European Student Union, and I am a reporter for the session number 3, providing leadership for sustainable development, the role of higher education. We have had 4 active speakers for this session. Those were George Sharashvaize, I hope I said this correctly, from the Tbilisi State University, Ivan Yakashvili, rector, then Michelle O'Dowd-Lowen from the National University of Ireland, who is a research fellow there, Per Hilber from the Malmo University, who is an associate professor and a pro-rector, and we have had a higher education expert, Pier Sandro Concocelli, from the Holy See. The facilitator of this session was Julian Locurlo, who is my dear friend and a colleague from the European Students' Union. In this 90 minutes of a very active and meaningful conversation, we have reached several conclusions. Rector George Sharvashice stated that the transformation into regional leaders for education and innovation has an important role in developing human capital as the principal block of sustainable development and progress. The Tbilisi State University concentrated on the current research focus of the institution, including the work done on renewable energy, water and green economy, geothermal and volcano research, as well as gender and equality-related topics, and some others in order to scientifically address the challenges that we face. In alignment to the development goals of 2023 Sustainable Development Agenda. He stressed the need for change, but considers ranking to be the demotivational factor in trying to achieve the change in higher education area. Progress should be made for the sake of the society, not for the place of ranking. And this message is the focus of their sustainability work. Rector stated that there is an immense need for the basic research to be the core in higher education system, upon which the interdisciplinarity should enrich the program and shape the scientists of today. Universities have to pressure the governments to take up a better forward-moving direction. Michelle, as a second speaker, pointed out a strategy at the University of Galway named Learn, Live, Lead, which tries to implement the knowledge on environment and new techniques for a better society today and a more engaged and proactive scientific community tomorrow. This model resonates strongly with students who are becoming more aware of the importance of their timely and broad engagement in the field of sustainable development. NUI Galway has proven that including sustainability in the learning process is a must in all higher education areas, but it also needs to be accompanied by the change in the university operations. Building the strategy from the core is how they spread the perspective on sustainable development onto the community and slowly achieving the change. I would like to share a quote from Michelle saying, "At NUI Galway, we view sustainability as a process rather than an endpoint. I think this is extremely important. It is a key message that we somehow overlook in tries to achieve the goals we have set for ourselves. This need for changes never ceases, nor should our proactivity and effort in further development of a sustainable future. The challenge to be relevant to society lays within the sustainable development in a holistic approach in teaching and learning. There are 6 groups within the sustainability development created inside the Learn, Live, Lead strategy, including teaching and learning, lowering CO2 emissions, etc. The key for a sustainable campus is involvement of students in all of the aspects of strategy development, feedback, and giving their opinions to the discussed matter. Their students have implemented positions of student leaders in engagement into social development in 4 different fields. This is the way in which students themselves prove that the sustainability is one of their key objectives, and they recognize the need for their action within this very important topic. Bringing into perspective the need for creating the sustainable society, Per Hilber, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of the University of Malmö, pointed out that there are 3 core values integrated into their own educational system, which is natural resource management, otherwise known as sustainability, gender equality, and international migration and ethnic relations. Upon these values, their curriculum was built and has changed over the past 21 years. But these formed foundations stayed the focus of their higher education system. With the creation of the university-wide Advisory Board for Sustainability, their efforts in practical approach were given a kick for the focused advancement. Diversity amongst the students enrolled at the university is key for moving forward, as well as involvement of students within internationalization process. However, their challenge is to engage students within the sustainable development curriculum building. Students need to be engaged in the action for climate change, for their role is invaluable and central to the action creation and implementation. There has to be a focus on global actions in sustainability, and diversification of incoming students could greatly contribute to this mission. Internationalization, becoming more environmentally friendly, is essential to achieving sustainable development goals, especially in the field of student transportation that gains momentum with the increase in the rate of student mobility. Digitalization is just one of the possible resolving matters on this problem, and the potential too for changing this gaining of the momentum of increasing CO2 emissions. Professor Coconcelli spoke of the project, The Role of Catholic Higher Education in Reducing Hunger and Malnutrition, which addresses the problems of malnutrition and world hunger. The project focuses on the development of new solutions within the higher education system as an answer to these problems and the transfer of innovative technologies to the communities. Promotion, encouragement, and sensitization of young scientists at the universities is in the area of food and nutrition issues, creating universities collaboration, networks, and sharing good practice within the community are the key aspects of this project. Professor recognizes that there is a need for few new competences amongst the population of students to produce international research, but they need to act locally to inspire change. The agricultural scientists can find a range of possibilities to use the increased CO2 in food production as one of the strategies to be sustainable, but also help in resolving hunger and malnutrition. Although internationalization is important, it shouldn't be the primary focus of higher education institutions. In this time in which technology has given us the opportunity to go green and be more environmentally friendly than it was possible before. Politics shaping our societies should be science-based and influence the change. And the students need to network amongst each other to grow together and to create a more responsible and active society of tomorrow. Research and science need to be empowered by themselves without limitations. And although they are not always neutral, they should always be ethical. We should be ready for global warming, using the existing technology and regulations, alongside shaping the minds of the future that are the students of today. The conclusion of the topic 3 of the roundtable is that we should lead by example, assuring that the impact on the environment is as low as we can make it. Sustainable development requires human ingenuity, action, and involvement. People are the most important resource on this path, and the university played the essential role in shaping of the global mindset. The need for financial support is evident, and the increase of funds would contribute additionally to the sustainable development implementation into higher education system. On that note, I would say that we are, all of us, engineers of the sustainable future. And we need to live the change to inspire it and create a new, forward-oriented global society. In the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Bologna process, I am confident that in the name of all of the students of tomorrow, we can send a message that the race to finish never stops, because we will not stop striving forward to build a more stable and green future for all of us and for all students to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. It wasn't an easy task, I will say. And now we have Briouk Delange. Yeah. Briouk will talk with us about the social dimension of the higher education. Briouk, you have the floor.
Thank you. Smarties and creativity. This is how I could sum up the session we had on social dimension on higher education this morning. Our first speaker, Chris Brink from Stellenbosch University, South Africa, introduced 3 theses concerning social dimension on higher education. In order to do that, Brink developed a critical viewpoint about the working of universities today. Indeed, our higher education institutions are too much focused on answering the question, what are we good at? For example, how many of you explained at your colleagues during this very own convention how your university is relevant in the field you are working in? Don't take me wrong, it's part of the game, and it is essential in order to build professional relationships necessary to improve research and knowledge. But how many of you already asked the question, what are we good for? Answering this question is bracing an effective social dimension. For his first thesis, Chris Brink discussed the apartheid regime in South Africa. Politicians wanted to make a bunch of countries within the country, with every one of them having their own cultures and universities. To be honest, coming from a tiny little country called Belgium, this situation sounds very familiar to me. But think about a pack of Smarties. What is the point about those sweets if you're sorting the greens with the greens, the blues with the blues, and the yellows with the yellows? What is the point of fractioning multiculturality? What is the purpose of a university without diversity? Quality needs diversity. But what is quality? Is it excellence? Is it the criteria defining the university ranks? For Brink, excellence is not enough, because we are not talking anymore about thinking, but rather about outputs. But universities have responsibilities. or should I say, must have responsiveness. Think about the water supply crisis in Cape Town last year. 4 universities are located in the city area, 3 of which having a water research institution. None of them made this crisis a priority in their research. None of them was responsive. Well, responsibility requires responsiveness. It is not about what you are able to give, but rather about what society needs. Our second speaker, John Storen from the University of East London, answering the following question. Is the social dimension of the Bologna process lost in translation? Being a student in linguistics and literature, I was immediately triggered by this title. Translation is about bringing notions from one culture to another without having per se prior knowledge on the target language. And this is of course the case when we are talking about the Bologna process. How can we translate features of social dimension into policies and practices in Europe and beyond, with each country having its own specificity? Without any surprise, this process is very complex. It was in 2007 in London that a communique mentioned clearly for the first time what social dimension should be by stating the following. Higher education should play a strong role in fostering social cohesion, reducing inequalities, and raising the level of knowledge, skills, and competences in society. Nearly 13 years later, we still haven't achieved this goal, nor at European level, nor at national level. Storen concluded by referring to the Paris communique, where ministers stated that the social dimension need to be strengthened and that the population of our university should mirror the diversity we have on the whole continent. In other words, the ivory tower of knowledge should be made accessible to every community. In order to have a better vision about the stakes in the process in the coming decades, 5 panelists explain us their vision in this process. Naina Schmidt, co-chair of the Social Dimension Group, was joined by Pietro Focci, a social entrepreneur youth delegate at the United Nations, Florian Rampelt, Deputy Managing Director of Hochschulforum Digitalisierung, and Andrea Burmann, Vice President of the University of Göttingen. Concerning digitalization as a tool of social dimension, Florian Rampelt discussed how digital technology should be used as a complementary instrument and contribute to the accessibility of higher education. Unfortunately, even if digitalization is a reality nowadays, not much has been done at the moment. Bologna Process beyond 2020 should focus on digitalization. Andrea Burmann discussed how the inclusivity is a key element within a geographic area. For Burmann, inclusivity goes along with transformative network. The aim is to transform a central region in order to become a more diverse hub of an inclusive organization. In order to do that, a distinction must be made between the functions and the capabilities, where capabilities are opportunities to function. The functioning of a university is crucial to make social inclusivity. And in a period where right-wing extremism is growing all over Europe, time is running more than ever before. For Nina Schmidt, the priorities of the coming years can be summed up as following. The BFUG should focus on relationships between the various communities and the university stakeholders, where the universities are not presented as a charitable donor, but as an actual partner. Therefore, it is crucial to improve bottom-up interactions and the focus on collaborative learning rather than competitive performance, as we tend to do nowadays. In other words, a university should become an area of development. Therefore, we should start speaking about social dimensions on the plural. We are not only talking about social justice, we are talking about lots of opportunities where we can act via social innovation. So the agenda after 2020 is all about engaging communities. Students will of course play a central role in this process, which is starting right now. To quote Pietro Focci, we want not to be the future, we want to be the present. We want to be at the table helping to deconstruct the society in order to rebuild it is in its real diversity. He emphasizes the fact that the SDGs shouldn't be used as an advertisement for universities, but rather as a standard at the basement of the social fabric of every university. Therefore, it is crucial that we involve NGOs, established communities, and social enterprises in the teaching curriculum. By doing so, a university will automatically open to the diverse world. I heard lots of nice words this morning, and the future that is represented looks bright and full of promises. But it is fundamental that we focus more on social dimension within the Bologna process, making it as important as the 3 key commitments. Therefore, I am asking you today to emphasize your speeches heard here in Bologna by actual deeds. It is your duty and your responsibility to break down the ivory tower of knowledge and to make our higher institutions safe and comfortable learning places for every smarty of this world, whether they are green, blue, or yellow. I thank you.
Thank you, Briok. And now I will ask to Maciej Reuki.
Yeah,
More or less, sorry.
thank you.
Bad Italian pronunciation. To report about careers and skills for the labor market of the future.
Exactly.
You have the floor.
Directors, dear students, and all the participants. Implementation of specific and practical solutions that respond to the fastly changing educational needs of students is essential. Take into account technology revolution, globalization, or, for example, demographic changes and migrations, it's necessary to emphasize that nowadays we should focus on the teaching and learning of useful skills to meet the future challenges and including the labor market. Our society's developments require profound and agile skills of teachers, professions key for their local leadership, and competences for community build-up. Whereas in East Asia, recent trends have been prioritizing arts, humanities, and social sciences as disciplinary fields where innovative knowledge and skills are crucial for the interest of diverse societies, the same fields are not in enough focus on the decision makers in the United States or some places in Europe. Learning from Asian examples might be a good inspiration to the European higher education area. So, what can be determined as future skills? According to the Future Skills Report of Next Skills of Baden-Württemberg Cooperative States University in Karlsruhe, Germany, we could list up to 16. In that case, we cannot mention, for example, subject development-related skills like autonomy, self-initiative, self-management, need or motivation for achievement, autonomous learning competence, ability to reflect, object-related skills like creativity, digital literacy, and social work or organization-related skills like sense-making, future mindset, cooperation competence, and communication competence. Given that, it's necessary to ask ourselves, if should these skills be a primary part of the curricula, or maybe should they be obtainable as additional learning outcomes of some courses? In that case, it's important that the curricula are so designed that they prepare students to obtain the new skills which allow them to adapt to the rapidly changing challenges of the labor market. That's why many universities are working on the future skills, but we can do it better. Otherwise, one of the main goals related to that process should be based on teaching students to understand and see the importance of future competences and skills. Skills should not be the single learning outcome, but they need to help in seeking knowledge and learning the content of a curriculum. This would allow not overburden the curricula and equip students with the transversal skills they need. We can also ask about the mission of the society of the future, above all in relation to the universities of the Coimbra Group. Are they really working of formative influence on the societies? Analyzing the current situation, we can admit that yes. because the students' mobility abroad helps to obtain skills and competences in intercultural communication and other transversal skills. Such competences are crucial for the labor market. The employers are looking for applicants with well-developed transversal skills, so involving students in extracurricular activities or any other way of learning can practically apply what they learned or make them ready for the future jobs. The other side of the process is related to the need to find a certain balance between humanities and technology-related competences. Is it possible to do that? As a society, we have to learn humanistic and social competences, which are essential because the labor market is changing and they guarantee the creative and innovative thinking which can be adapted in any circumstances. Humans will not be able to compete with artificial intelligence in terms of calculating, but artificial intelligence will never be able to think about societies with empathy and be creative mind and note the cultural differences. People need to control it and be responsible for the developments of all technologies. We cannot forget also that one of the recurrent themes of the future of work is the automation of jobs. Some estimates even a 50% of replacement rate of jobs due to automation. At the same time, jobs that currently don't exist will develop from the process of automation, and it's an important concept that the point of view of professional education. Because in that case, we also should find balance between the high level of competences, specialization required by the labor market, and the flexibility to adapt to an ever-changing world of work. The universities should not compete with each other. They should rather build networks which would support their development. These networks can contribute to the discussions in their sectors or locations. One element that might foster automatic recognition of degrees is Europe-wide harmonization of curricula, both in structure and contents. It's necessary to mention that this is a continuous issue where neither the European Union or the European higher education area have legal powers, but they provide a supportive environment for cross-border degrees. Today, we could mention at least one of them, and it's the European Masters in Translation. It's not a single program. It's a network of institutions which provide courses of translations, but one of the problems is related to the evaluation of students, lack of tools, but analyzing this aspect from another side, we need to mention that an important learning outcome is to use technology to collaborate and develop long-distance learning. In that case, translation is an example of a field where technology can be used to improve it, but it can never replace humans because no machine is able to reflect the cultural context. This is an example of how to equalize access to knowledge and competences between countries, but we still have procedural problems on how can we work. Finally, we can focus on the role of students in the process of designing and personalizing the curricula, because as we all know, we are living in a world of work where personalized knowledge, skills, and competences become uppermost. Although some may think that students are not ready for co-designing curricula, these systems already work in many places. Students need to take responsibility for their learning, and that's true that once we enter the higher education, we may not be ready for taking the responsibility for our learning. But then there is a place for the institutions to help us and support in getting enough skills to be ready to take a lead in our own education. One of the elements that can be a driver for employment in Europe is the automatic recognition of degrees and diplomas. However, despite the many declarations from the European higher education area, ministerial conferences, and the European Union, automatic recognition is not reality yet, but it's a concept that could improve conditions of entering labor markets around the continued work. The recognition of diplomas and credits is very important, but not yet automatic in Europe. Students need to know about possibilities of recognition, but also the institutions need to have prepared staff who provides sufficient information and guaranteed fast and efficient procedures. Smoothly working recognition is must for the labor market of mobile workers. In this place, it's essential to ask for the very common concept for all of us. The European Commission is promoting the project of the European universities with the aim of establishing by 2024 around 20 networks of European universities with a deep structural collaboration whose long-term might become single European institutes releasing European degrees. Although it's an idea which includes certain perspectives and influences the international cooperation, we must ask what should be done to make the project more inclusive, affordable for students fighting social inequalities and supporting a diversity of higher education institutions in Europe. The European universities seem to be triggering the will of cross-border collaboration of the institutions. We should use this chance to excel in mobility and to promote the integrations of academia, analyzing models in some countries. The main objective is not only to have graduates, but also to make a network of institutions to start a discussion about the role of the labor market for the future, and especially for the future of the higher education, answering the question if should we structure the whole system. To conclude, the environment of students in co-designing the curricula is essential for assuring the new skills that students really need to be provided. They shouldn't be the main goal of education, but they should support achieving the learning outcomes of the programs. Taking into account the increasing role of technology in the labor market, the human workers will still play a crucial role and focus on education on such fields as humanities and social sciences is needed for creativity and empathy of the future workers, because humans will be not replaced by technology, but they need to bear responsibility for it. Because the skills of the labor market are changing so rapidly, all tools like automatic recognition and European universities or curricula planning need to be planned strategically to foresee the needs of the future skills for the labor market, answering the current needs only. I would like to thank you for the attention, and I hope that this summary has been useful to brief you on the important discussion about the skills that the labor market of the future requires. And please remember, students need skills and want to obtain them, but we will not achieve it without the support of institutions and governments. Thank you.
Well, if I could add something to that second part of our discussion, I will say that the intuition to give the floor and the voice to the students has been a very good one. First of all, because you have been fulfilling all your duty of rapporteur in a very clever and pointing out way, but also because you make me remember that students are the real meaning of university. Sometimes I think that some of my colleagues will love a university where students are not there. because it's the perfect university. It's clean, silent, and perfectly manageable. I do think that the math that any student is used to do is the most challenging and fascinating part of creativity. And it's pushing all academics to remember that your time for creativity and innovation is probably behind your shoulders for the majority of the time. Well, but if you don't mind, I would like to keep you on the floor and not let you go, because I would like to discuss a bit with you about what you have taken on the discussion with the other people participating on our panels. And Amy, help me. Where are you from, Amy?
From Finland.
From Finland, okay. Elmi, academic and related civic value in changing society. So it means this concept seems implying the idea that the civic values are strictly connected with the idea of academics. So academia is based on civic values in some way. Did you perceive that during the discussion?
Yes, we discussed that. in the discussion, and also the notion of why academic freedom is or has been so difficult to assess through the Bologna process is because it is so linked to democracy and democratic values. And that was pointed out by the speakers that it could be also one of the reasons why it's been so difficult to take academic freedom into account in the Bologna process, because it's a sensitive issue. And if you if you suppose that someone is not having academic freedom in their country, then you're in the same sense implying that maybe they're not that democratic, and that's an issue. So we did talk about that.
Well, I do agree. I mean, democracy is a very strange animal to be understood. It is pretty much connected with the idea that you should listen to anybody, even if you don't agree with him. And being as I am now on the other side of the barricade, I mean, dealing with academics as a manager of the academic system, well, let's say financer more than a manager, sometimes I realize that it's not that easy to listening even to the strangest ideas that you can receive, and normally they feel, people that they present it to you, they feel that it's the best one possible. Well, but there is something that you were saying just right now that is catching my attention. Why do you perceive that the Bologna process doesn't have paid enough attention, if I interpreting well your feelings, to academic freedom? So you think that we have been too far away from the initial idea, or there is something else missing in the game that we don't get the right attention?
Yes, so according to the discussion, what we talked about today was that even though academic freedom is listed as one of the fundamental values and it is respected and so forth, we also see infringements on it, and we also discussed whether or not the Bologna process actually has increased commodification and in that way limited academic freedom. And I think it was Livio Mattei that proposed that institutional autonomy has increased during these 20 years, but it has not been seen in the academic freedom in the same way. So that was quite a bit of the discussion, and it seems to be a unanimous will to now shift focus to academic freedom and talk about it more and put it as one of the most important missions for following years.
Yeah, I do agree, actually. It's always difficult to understand, probably getting back to the basis, what is the real concept of freedom? Because, of course, freedom is a very sensitive animal, and it's difficult to understand when freedom is becoming, oppressive to somebody else. There is a very funny little booklet that I suggest to you to find and read. It was written by an aristocratic of the age of Pericles in the old Greece, and is entitled "Democracy is a Form of Violence." And because in effect, democracy is always some kind of form of violence, because it's a majority that decide, but when you have a majority, you have usually a minority. And that minority usually feels oppressed by the ones that have decided in another direction. So it's a game not easy to implement in general terms. But the sum up of 20 years of Bologna, it's a positive or a negative result for you?
For me personally,
I mean, yeah, of course, personally. You are here.
yes, I think the Bologna process has brought a lot of good things when you look at recognition and student mobility and so forth. So I think also in the discussion today we agreed that there are many good things that have come along with the Bologna process. However, we should now shift focus more towards also protecting academic freedom, and we have a lot of things to celebrate, but we also have things to improve.
Room for improvement, I will say. Okay. Thank you, really. Thank you, Albi. Borna. There you are. Student-centered learning. I start to be tired, I'm sorry. Well, as we said with Helmi, sometime I feel that for certainly academic, the perfect university will be the university without students. So a very silent and quiet studio where anybody could have the time to do his own research. But really, I mean, university has been a creation from students. So it's students that have decided to create university and not vice versa.
Of course. Well, I would say it's all about the students, because students are the ones who will take the lead later, of course, and teachers are here to support them, to engage, to give them the opportunity to discuss and, to work on themselves.
Yeah. You know that being a professor, one of the most difficult part of the activity you have is not to put too much of yourself on what students are proposing to you. I have been for about, let's say, 20 years dealing with final theses. And the temptation to rewrite everything because it was a mess, it's come up continuously. But really, it's like being a gardener, and you see an idea that is just a little leaf getting out on a big mass and bunch of words, and let that little leaf grow and help the student to understand and help him to track his path. It's such a satisfaction.
Well, that is the whole purpose of student-centered learning, of course, where you have a student, you have a teacher, and then what's important is the communication between the student and the teacher, of course. The main role of the teacher is to kind of lead student through its own discoveries and findings.
Yeah, so it's part of the mentoring that our previous inspiring person was talking with us, Professor Jalbout was talking about. Now, the idea that you're supposed to give examples and help the student to understand himself and what could be his role on society. And this is carrying me on the panel that Peggy was the rapporteur. So providing leadership for sustainable development. And sustainable development, it's a very complex concept because it's related with civil society and the perception to be part of a complex society where anybody must play his own role for the common house, I will say. Is it that your perception too? So how do you feel towards the sustainability on university?
Well, I would say that each university has provided their own concept in dealing with sustainable development and how do they want to implement it. I have to say that I got really inspired by some of the speakers today speaking about how they build their entire curricula depending on the sustainable development. And I think the core is thinking this way, thinking out of the box and adapting what you have known so far. Especially this is the problem with some of the universities who have maybe a longer tradition and sometimes do not want to leave this long tradition that they have and just progress as fast as maybe some younger universities that maybe feel that this is something that they have to do. And I really feel that this is an area which is really open and it lets you be creative and also it lets you inspire some new changes and it lets you engage students in such measure in which they can do a lot of work for the university and all of the results can be seen. Of course, the university has to have a structure and to support the sustainable development. And I think the core is coming from the university and spreading the words and spreading these values into students' learning is something that they will lead on and take home and implement into their lives. So I think that university has the key role here in sustainable development, whether it is I don't know the reducement of plastic or any measure counts. But I think that we have a lot to improve and 20% goal has to get even bigger if we want to make a substantial difference in sustainable development.
And more, consider the fact that, well, I'm old enough to remember when the Rio Declaration was underlining the first setup of goals for the world, and see how this exercise has improved with the Sustainable Development Goal, recognizing that sustainability is not just connected with the pollution or use of fossil carbon engine or whatever, but is also related with the role of the human nature towards society, the women recognition in careers, disability. So it's a completely, let's say, Copernican revolution in terms of the conception of sustainability as I was at your age studying in the beginning the concept of sustainability that was only related with environmental issues. It's much more than this today, and I think is an incredible improvement. Do you think so?
Yes, I would agree. I see that there is, of course, a lot more to improve, but I would say that from where we were, I remember when I started studying, I think that this is a whole another mindset now built around the sustainable development, and I would say the community has embraced it in such manner that it has become a global phenomenon, and I would say that this is actually something that unifies people, because they can finally also get out more, speak about these things, inspire changes in their local communities, maybe and the opposite of this was maybe using some digital approaches or just speaking about these things and just discussing it on a university level. So I think that this phenomenon that has started and that we can also see on the public networks is something that is really inspiring, and I think that the real hype of the sustainable development is yet to happen, but I think that we are at the beginning now and that we have been doing a great job so far.
Thank you, Peggy. Well, in effect, I wanted to have the voice of our second round of all of us, but unfortunately, it seems that we are running late. Well, sorry. It's just enjoying a lot talking with our young rapporteurs. Sorry to say young. I didn't want to patronize you at all, believe me. Our rapporteurs, because they have been extremely effective, and I please all the audience to applaud them, because really they have been great. Well, this is the university that we are shaping for the future, and I really hope that one day when you will have a social role, or maybe you will teach in a university, you will remember this day as an important point of your growing up career. So thank you for being part of us. Thank you so much.